This case takes place in Chiltern, England in the year 2009. Andrew Gardner was a 35-year-old man who was well liked by the people who knew him. Although he was regarded as a friendly man, he was known to be quite vulnerable due to having learning difficulties and had trouble making friends. Because of this, people were known to take advantage of him. Andrew was also in a relationship with a 28-year-old woman named Claire Nichols. It was in 2005 that Andrew would meet Claire. Claire had 3 children with a previous partner named John Peterson. John was no longer allowed to see the children due to being convicted of crimes involving minors as young as 5 years of age. Before too long, Claire was pregnant with Andrew's child, and in July of 2008, the two moved in together in Chiltern, and Andrew became the surrogate father to the 3 children. Living with the couple was Claire's younger brother, Simon. It was during this time that Claire became violent towards Andrew. It wasn't uncommon for her to take advantage of him. Andrew would also need permission to do just about anything. That included seeing his family and friends or just going to the shops. She would lash out over the most trivial of things. These outbursts would both include verbal insults and violent attacks. Sadly, Andrew would just take these insults and beatings. The control Claire had over Andrew led him to become more and more isolated. The restrictions as to when he could leave the house would tighten as time went on. Since Claire allowed her younger brother Simon to live with them, she had control over him too. She would use him to attack Andrew on her behalf. If Andrew would do something to annoy Claire, she would get Simon to beat him on command. Andrew was 5'9" and had a skinny frame, but his body continued to become more frail as Claire would begin to withhold food from him. If Andrew wanted to eat, he would have to ask for permission. And if he did ask for food, Claire would just call him a drain on resources and decline his request. If she decided he would not be eating, Andrew would have to go through the garbage for scraps when no one was looking, or would have to try and take food from the cupboards in the middle of the night. If he was caught, or if it was noticed that food was missing, Andrew would be beaten. After Andrew and Claire's child was born, he would only be allowed to drop Claire's children off at school and to pick them up. He would not be allowed to go anywhere else. Even after the birth of their child, Claire continued to be abusive. At first, it's believed that Andrew stayed so he could look after his and Claire's child, and to also help to look after the children that he had grown to love. And then, Claire invited somebody else to live in the home. 44-year-old Stephen Martin. Stephen was Claire's ex-lover, and she had decided to allow him to live in the house. Like Andrew, Stephen also had learning difficulties. His IQ was 59, which is the lowest 1% of the country. It very much seems like Claire would choose to engage in relationships with people that she deemed vulnerable and easier to take advantage of. Once Stephen moved into the house, the abuse turned to outright torture. And the amount of torture that Andrew endured was nothing short of horrific. Claire, Stephen, and Simon would come up with twisted ways to inflict as much pain as possible to Andrew. Along with the starvation and the beatings, they would also take Andrew to the bathroom and place him in the bath. They would then pour boiling water over him, especially over his feet. They tied him and held him against a hot radiator and burned him with lighters and cigarettes. He would be slashed with serrated knives, whipped with knotted tea towels and electrical wires, and his head was repeatedly stomped on. The 3 would take sharp objects and use it to play knots and crosses on his skin. Andrew's body was so badly beaten that he was made to sleep on newspaper so the blood would not seep into the carpet or sofa. On numerous occasions, Claire and Stephen would wake up Andrew in the middle of the night and have sex in front of him. Claire would get gratification from seeing Andrew getting upset by this. and would enjoy seeing him battered and bruised laying on the floor, incapable of stopping her having her way. She is, in every sense of the word, a sadist. That meaning a person who derives pleasure, especially gratification, from inflicting pain or humiliation on others. What is perhaps most disturbing about this case is that Claire would have Stephen and Simon pin Andrew down, whilst her children would join in on the abuse. She would encourage them to inflict pain upon the man who had taken care of them. And since they were so young and didn't know any better, they complied with their mother's demands. The children would use keys to scratch and cut Andrew's skin. Because of this, Andrew began to cry, so the 3 adults grabbed pens, handed them to the children, and they all wrote offensive slurs on his body. From what I can tell, the children's ages ranged from 7 to 10. Not including the child that Andrew and Claire had together. To even try to imagine what Andrew went through is hard enough. It was on the 13th of March 2009 that the 3 would attack Andrew for the final time. As Andrew lay on his back, they began to repeatedly jump on him, causing his ribs to break. His ribs breaking resulted in his internal organs being badly damaged. Claire also repeatedly bashed Andrew's head against the floor. With Andrew's body already battered and malnourished, these injuries were too great, and tragically, it was on this day that he passed away. The 3 then decided to call the emergency services so they could have his body taken away. But before they did, they fabricated a story to try and avoid detection. The emergency services were called, and they arrived on the scene. They entered the home to find the lifeless body of Andrew in a horrific state. Claire, Simon and Stephen told the paramedics that Andrew had gone to the shops to grab some shopping, and that on the way home he had been attacked. They claimed that Andrew had staggered home and told them he had been attacked before passing out on the floor. The paramedics could tell that this story appeared to be false. Andrew clearly had multiple visible injuries that were new and old, and an autopsy was soon conducted. This autopsy was able to reveal the extent of Andrew's injuries and took a total of 7 hours to fully conduct. He had rib injuries that are usually only seen in car crashes or from falling from a height. He had a total of 21 rib fractures and breaks. They found multiple burns from cigarettes and lighters to his back and neck, and burns to his back which were consistent with being held against a hot radiator. He also had considerable burns to his feet from the kettle being poured on him. One of his feet that had serious burns had also been stamped on repeatedly, causing the skin to come off and bones to fracture. He had cuts from knives, lacerations from being whipped, bruising from being stomped on, and a cut on his arm that was so deep that it exposed a tendon. Even though he was 5 foot 9 inches tall, Andrew weighed just 57 kilograms at the time of his death, and had over 150 injuries to his body, along with brain and organ damage. All the signs showed that Andrew had been tortured and starved for some time, a level of depravity rarely seen. The 3 of them were brought in for questioning, and each of them denied murder. But their story simply didn't make any sense when it came to Andrew's injuries, and so they were charged with his murder. When questioned further, the 3 pointed the finger at each other. Simon stated that his sister Claire had a short temper and that she was capable of causing harm if she was to lose it. The children who lived in the house were also questioned, and they spoke of the horrors they witnessed and the horrors they took part in. These confessions implicated the 3 adults. The trial began in January of 2010. The 3 were all accused of being involved and responsible in the final beating that killed Andrew, with Claire being seen as the ringleader that encouraged the violence. A description of Andrew's injuries were read out to the court, causing many of the jurors to weep. Some details surrounding everyone involved came to the fore. It turns out that Stephen Martin was Claire's mother's former partner and had an affair behind the mother's back. And Andrew had also dated Claire's sister in the past. The prosecution team highlighted how Claire seemed to prey on men that were vulnerable and susceptible to her influence. Claire claimed that on the day that Andrew died, she had only punched him twice, and that she only punched him because they had argued. The prosecution team asked Claire if she accepted that the statements provided to the police after Andrew died were false. They declared her a liar and stated, "On that occasion, during the final attack, Andrew was pinned to the floor and he was pinned by Simon and Stephen. You then stamped on his already burned foot, fracturing it and jumping on him, breaking his ribs. You still cannot bring yourself to admit the true extent of what you did that night. You even corrupted your own children, and they took their lead from you. They scratched him with keys, they hit him, they punched and kicked him, all following your lead, and you did nothing to stop them." Claire then broke down and began to cry, and replied, "I do know one thing, that I never wanted to see that man die. I admit to jumping on him once on one occasion. The rest of his broken ribs would have been caused by my brother Simon. I didn't realize that my knee going onto his ribs would cause him so much pain." Claire admitted that she would cause harm to Andrew, but was adamant that she never wanted him to die. Stephen's defense team claimed that he had fallen into a spider's web, at the center of which was Claire, and placed the vast majority of the blame onto her. They depicted a lonely man who was living by himself before being invited into Claire's house, and claimed that because of that, he didn't do anything to stop the abuse and torture of Andrew. Stephen admitted to pouring boiling water over Andrew's feet and holding him up against a piping hot radiator, but claiming that he was just messing around. Stephen also gave an account of the series of events that led to Andrew's death. He said he saw Claire banging Andrew's head on the floor before declaring, "I think I've killed him." He then stated that he felt upset and disgusted in himself watching Claire repeatedly hit Andrew, and that he was sorry for not putting an end to it. He also claimed that he was too scared to stop it happening. Claire Nichols' 7-year-old son also bravely gave evidence for the court via a video link. He said, "My mum got him and stomped on him. She does that because he was stealing food. He stole a chocolate bar once. I scratched him with keys and also hit him with my fists. We wrote swear words on his back, and we'd do that with pen and nail varnish." All three were found guilty of murder. Claire was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 32 years. Simon was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. And Stephen was sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years. Neither of all three will be released after serving their minimum terms unless the parole board considers that the danger they pose to the public has passed. One neighbor stated that she remembered hearing shouting coming from the house, but said that she never could have imagined what was really going on. She said, "I could hear arguing and shouting quite often, but whenever I saw Claire, she seemed so loving and caring. I did see Andrew from time to time, but he never spoke." This case is an incredibly horrific one. The abuse that Andrew suffered is compounded by the fact that Claire got her own children to take part in the abuse of their father figure. It is just beyond disturbing and something that has deeply sickened me. I can also imagine that this has psychologically harmed the children a great deal, and I hope that they have been able to overcome it. There may be some people who will say that Claire's children should have known right from wrong. But it's important to remember, when you are witnessing your mother abuse a man for a large portion of your life, this behavior can somewhat become normalized. And when Claire told them to take part, and told them that they wouldn't get into trouble, this would have led them to believe that what they were doing was okay. Even adults are capable of carrying out horrors if they believe there to be no consequences, and if an authority tells them to do it. I'm sure plenty of you have heard of the experiments of Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo. If you haven't, I would strongly suggest researching these experiments.